First of all, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
I love the biotech industry and communication, so happy to be here and speak with you about it.
great. I know our audience is going to really enjoy this one. I always like to know a little bit about the person, though, first. So I'd love to know your career path. I like to ask way back. So, what did you want to be when you were 7? What are you now, and how'd you get there?
I'm certain that I was not thinking about work at all, as no 7-year-old should be, but I do have a vague memory of wanting to be a cheerleader for the Dallas Cowboys, which I live in Philadelphia, so that's blasphemy to even say, but I just remember loving the outfits and all the fun part of it. So I have a recollection I wanted to be a cheerleader, which I've never done. Although as I think about it and building teams and working with people, I do love to cheer people on and, elevate people's wins and tell people great jobs. So who knows, maybe that was a little bit of foreshadowing for my role today. But what I'm doing now, I'm the Chief Client Officer at Health+Commerce. We are an integrated public relations and marketing agency that our client base is exclusively healthcare. So biotech companies, medical device, life science companies. And when I think about my career path, I always start at the beginning. I went to Temple University in Philadelphia and graduated with a degree in public relations and journalism. And coming out of school, I just was looking for a job. I really wanted to enter the workforce. And I had interviewed at a number of public relations agencies in the city of Philadelphia and was interviewing with one called Dorland Sweeney Jones. And I'll never forget in my interview, the person who was interviewing saying, if you're not careful in 20 years, you'll be niched in healthcare, as if it was a bad thing, like a watch out. And I think about that all the time because one, she was absolutely right, but I just think it was such a blessing. I have never left healthcare. I've done it my whole career for 25 years, and I'm so grateful that I stumbled upon it just because that agency had a job. But I just absolutely love being able to do what I do well with strategic communications, but in an area where I feel like I'm making a difference and helping people make decisions about their healthcare. So I'm glad that I got niched into healthcare. I worked at that agency for many years. From there, I went in-house at Genentech, where I was heading external communications for the company's cancer and ophthalmology medicines. That's where I really learned biotech and just fell in love with it. It was the mecca for biotech at the time that I was there. I also worked in-house at Abbott, where I shifted more into medical devices and learned more about global communications, internal communications, HR communications, et cetera. And for the past 7 years or so, I've been at Health+Commerce, where I was one of the first employees. So there were just a handful of us and working to grow the agency to where we are today. If you are in biotech, or you're thinking about, you like science, but maybe don't want to be a doctor or a scientist, communications is just awesome. I just love it. I go to Temple University and speak to public relations and communication students. And my goal is to train the next generation of communicators and get them to think about healthcare as a career, because there's a lot of jobs out there and the work we do makes a difference. We view our role in the healthcare ecosystem to be very important. Every person on this planet is a consumer of healthcare, and how they get their information is through people like us. So we have to be good at our jobs because the work we do ultimately helps patients. So it's a great field. If you're interested in it, pursue it. You can put your skills in communications to a good use and good purpose. And there's a lot of jobs. It's a growing industry. So I just can't say enough about healthcare communications.
So I'm really curious about the whole PR thing and how that is applied to biotech. So can you tell me, in healthcare devices and all that, can you tell me a little bit about the strategy there? What does your job entail and how does it benefit those companies?
So biotech It's just such a fun space because there's a lot of innovation happening, a lot of entrepreneurship, and the potential to help patients is just enormous. But with all of those things that are fun and make it exciting, there's challenges there and areas where these companies need communications support. So just as you think about communications in your daily life with the people that you're interacting with, what you say and how you say it and when you say it is so important. An idea is just an idea if you can't communicate it out to your various audiences. So we work with companies to really help define and tell their stories. And there's a lot of biotech companies out there that are competing for resources. That could be money from investors. It could be new employees. It could be patients for clinical studies. A lot of different audiences that they're trying to reach, but their science can be very complex. So we work with these companies to really articulate how they're different, what they're doing, what the impact on patients or doctors or the healthcare system could be, and then figuring out how to get those messages out there. And that last point is really important because obviously communications channels are rapidly evolving, and these companies need experts to understand the different channels for communication. The days of writing a press release and putting it in the mail and getting an article in the New York Times are over. And you really need someone who can be strategic about helping the company with their messaging, but then also how to get that message out there to the right audience using the right channels.
That makes a lot of sense. And so we talk about how founders, early biotechs, we are so focused on the science, and you forget how much extra stuff there is to run a business. One of those things is getting your message out. You mentioned talent in that overarching theme of where you need to communicate. What are you seeing? This is totally selfish. I just want to know. What are you seeing companies do to differentiate themselves in this space to the talent that's out there to compete for talent better?
They have to show up as a credible company with exciting science and solid leadership. I think with any job, when you're interviewing, you're thinking about the people that you would be working with. Do you like them? Do you respect them? Do you aspire to be like them? Being able to communicate how your science is intriguing, but also the team and the leadership you'd be working with. And of course, culture is so important as well. I had mentioned I worked at Genentech for almost a decade. That company has always been known for building a culture based on people, patient, science. Any former employee could talk about what that culture is. And so being able to really define it and articulate it, that's what employees are looking for. What is the work environment going to look like? So again, you can have all of those things, but if you're not, explaining it to a potential recruit in a way that they can understand it or find it, then it could be a hidden secret. So we actually help many companies with some of their HR related communication, especially using digital tools and social media, LinkedIn, through different blog posts, or even getting creative with how they put their open positions online. So we provide a lot of support that way to help companies find and recruit talent and also retain the talent that they have.
I'm just really curious about this messaging, this branding for employers, because and I imagine this is across the board, but as you just mentioned, the landscape has changed and social media is more prevalent. How are biotechs leveraging that so that they can get their message out to maybe a younger generation of workers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say it's evolving. I think healthcare in general, and I've been doing this for 25 years, it's not a criticism, it's an observation. Healthcare has not always been at the forefront of embracing new channels. I think just because it's regulated, because they're so focused on the science and advancing medicines, that sometimes there can be a hesitation to using new channels. But I talk a couple times a year at Temple University. It's my alma mater. And I always ask the students where they get their news from. And they're not reading newspapers or watching the news. Things that we're still using to communicate with our audiences, I hope aren't going to be obsolete. But the next generation, you definitely need to be thinking about how they get their information. We actually use LinkedIn a lot. There's a lot of professional networking that still happens there. We're also seeing just an explosion of video, podcasts, things like that. So really just making sure that we're thinking about the different communications channels mix. I think biotech companies are dipping their toes in the waters, and some that have been doing it for years are on the forefront of using some of those channels. I'm seeing more companies doing their own podcasts or using more video. So it's definitely evolving.
We've been running an experiment with our clients. I'm a small company, so I get to do that. It's fun. And we have been, for the last couple of months, every time we open a job, I or one of my recruiters makes a video about the job. It's just a little snapshot, and we talk about the company culture, the exciting things going on, and then what does success look like in that role? What's the team like? What are they doing day to day?
Sure.
We've gotten such great feedback, and it's just me or one of my recruiters doing it. I feel like the feedback would be better if it was the hiring manager themselves, but that feedback has been so good from the candidates. They get a glimpse.
Great idea. I'm going to steal it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't take all that long with our current technology. It's like a 2.5-minute video. It makes a difference.
Yes. And now all of these social media channels are also being optimized for video content. So I think that's just going to continue to evolve. And also, we're seeing more and more companies use video as well. So the company, the potential employees that they're recruiting needing to submit video resumes or video case studies as well. So I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon.
Tell me a little bit about the strategies that you use with smaller companies, maybe more startup feeling companies versus more established companies. And how can startups really think about working with a company like yours earlier in the process?
Yeah, I love working with startups. And what's great about it is that often they are starting to think about communications as a strategic part of their business for the very first time. So it's a little bit of a clean slate. And that's where, I think it's a lot of fun versus maybe a big pharma that has a communications team of 20 or 30 people, and you're trying to enter something that's already established. Usually when we're working with startups, they know they need help. We get to work directly with CEOs and executive teams, and it's just a lot of fun to do it from the very beginning. One of the first things we always advise, and it's very simple, but it's overlooked, is messaging. And we sometimes will get resistance that, oh, we don't need messaging, or we have messaging. But do you really have it nailed down in a clear and concise way that is segmented by audience? And we have a process where we help lead companies through this. And what we often find, and one of the most valuable reasons to do it, is that, say, a CEO thinks that they have messaging, but the chief scientific officer, they have messaging, but it's not aligned. And by going through that process, you're forcing a strategic discussion around what the company wants to say about itself and how to do that. So it really is a strategy to have messaging from the very beginning that aligns all of your executives and also makes things much more efficient, because if other things are coming down the line, a website, a press release, an investor deck, having that messaging from the beginning, you're aligned, and it makes that process for development and approval and alignment much more efficient and seamless. So we almost always start there. Also, making sure that communications is a strategic function and that it's brought to the table early and often and is cross-functional. When it's seen as a tactic and comms is brought in late, it can be a little bit too late to really influence how you're telling your story. Just to give a really simple example, I've worked with a company where the CEO had done a media interview and hadn't informed us of doing it. And this person was not very happy with how the interview turned out and asked us if we could get a correction. And if something is factually incorrect, yes, we'll go to a reporter and say, this isn't true. Can you please correct it? And usually that's the case. But it was really hard to tell. Was it that the CEO didn't say that? Did they not like the tone? Was it even the right outlet to be speaking to? And because we weren't brought in early to prep for that interview, work on the messaging, build that relationship with the reporter, the story didn't really turn out how it could have. And so it was a missed opportunity. And information's currency. So when you're doing these interviews, you want to try to shape it to the best of your ability. And coming in after the fact was way, way too late. So really just making sure that you have communications as a strategic function at the seat of the table when you're thinking about all the different times when you will be telling that story. And sometimes it's proactive because you're launching a product or you're at a medical meeting or you're sharing data, but also sometimes it's reactive. If you have a negative data or an event in one of your studies, you want communications to be there as a strategic cross-functional partner in some of the decision making. So I think that's important for startups to know and be aware of. So have that messaging, how to use your communications team effectively to really shape your business strategy and communications moving forward. And then pulling all that through their entire external presence, whether it's working on a website or press releases or social media, just being very consistent and building that story using all of that foundation that you built at the beginning.
So let's say a small company comes to you and they don't know how to use communications and PR appropriately. Do you have some education in place to help them to learn to do that? Because they're learning all the skills, right? How to run a business. Do you teach them how to leverage someone like yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do. There can be some education that needs to be had, but also these are small companies and they have a lot of priorities. And especially in the startup world, they're wearing a lot of hats. And we like to be their partner where we can do that work for them. We want them to think of us as an extension of their team. So yes, we do some education, why we're recommending a certain strategy or approach. But really, I think the value in working with an agency like ours that has this decades of strategic counsel is we can serve as their communications team. And that trust is built, allowing us to do that so that they can then focus on developing medicines or raising money or conducting clinical trials, whatever it is that is their priority as well. So education, yes, but I think the value that they find is when we can really be that extension of their team. And for us as an agency, many of us have in-house experience. We know what it's like to be in the shoes of our clients and believe that's something that we bring to them so that they can trust us because we've been in their shoes. We understand what it's like.
Yeah, that's super. I like that approach a lot. It's a nice option for before you have the funds to build an in-house communications team like Genentech has.
Well, there's mid-sized companies too, right? There's companies that are startups that don't have their teams, and then there's the Genentechs, but there's also those kind of mid-sized companies that maybe they just went IPO or they're moving into late stage development and maybe they do hire a communications person. And sometimes they just need extra arms and legs, or a lot of our clients will be let's call it a VP of comms and investor relations. That's a lot of work. And so how can an agency come in and help them with one of those branches as well? So we work with companies of kind of all sizes along that scale so that we understand the needs of comms at every stage and can plug in where they need the help the most.
So very versatile. I like the augmenting the existing teams too. I want to talk a little bit about that investor piece that you just talked about. So I think pitch decks are like the word of the year. I know it's 2 words, but we hear a lot about pitch decks. People are really stressed about funding right now. How do you support that process and how do you pull that messaging through into pitch decks and things like that?
Yeah, a pitch deck is such an important communications tool for companies. And we're not an investor relations firm. I don't have the financial expertise and relationships the way that a true IR company or agency would, but it still is telling a story. And no one wants to look at a deck that's just full of charts and numbers. So you still need to pull through that story. So oftentimes we will partner with client or even their IR firm if they have it to take a deck and really make it sing. Make sure that there's one clear, crisp idea on each individual slide. And that's important because these biotech companies, and I'm sure you've seen pitch decks, there's a lot of ideas, a lot of data on these slides. And you're like, wow, going through and applying best practices to communications and messaging, making sure there's one crisp idea. How is your brand pulled through visually? Because visual storytelling is so important. How is a patient component represented in that deck? We go through slide by slide and map out the message and then how to build the visual data and imagery around it. And then also helping executives give that presentation. A lot of message prep, it's like media training, presentation training, allowing them to practice role playing where maybe we're an aggressive investor asking the tough questions. Those are just some of the ways, but we've helped a number of companies either design their investor deck from the beginning, where we're working even with what is your company brand and the messaging and how's it pulled through an investor deck, or even just something that they've been using for a while and really needs a refresh and thinking about, how to kind of up level the story, the message, the visual element, and then the telling of that.
I think people, especially the founders that I work with, early career, they maybe finished a postdoc and they're in the MIT accelerator or something.
Yep.
The pitch decks look a lot more like thesis defense slides, and it's a different purpose. And the story is what's missing. We're humans. We love stories. And I think that is not innately maybe part of a scientist's abilities or unique abilities.
Nor should it be, right? I'm not pretending to be a scientist or a CEO, and I don't expect every person to be excellent at communicating. And that's where we can help. And communications needs to be practiced. To do it well, to get your story heard, it needs to be deliberate and it needs to be practiced. And I think there's a lot of CEOs who are very good at it, and some who are not, and some who it comes naturally, and some who it doesn't. But we really work to understand what that communication style is, what their experience is, and how to prep them in a way that works with their communication style and approach so it feels real and authentic and doesn't just come across as a robot as well. So it's something that takes some practice.
Could we talk a little bit about that? I am really interested in what does that training, media training or pitch training, what does that look like?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And one of the things we always try to do is to really understand who it is we're training and what they will be responsive to. I've been in some media training sessions where you're just like really going at a person because a reporter could do that. And, reporters aren't usually out to get you, but sometimes they are. And investors can be the same way. But that practice can make people kind of, shut down. So first, you want to understand who you're training and what will they be responsive to, and then adapt your approach to that person. We always practice media or presentation best practices like bridging to your message, flagging things that are important, posture, lighting, where to look, kind of those pieces of it. One of the things we found that is, really successful is just a dry run where go through the first time and get it out of your system, and then stopping and providing feedback and doing it again. So it's just that practice, but you also have to be willing and able to give very constructive feedback to people that are leading companies and agents. Like the trust needs to be there, that the feedback is coming from a place of trying to help them and just practicing. And then there's different tips and techniques that we teach along the way to help people, whether it's like a cadence or tone, or how to better answer a question, or how to take that information and bridge to a message. So there's lots of very well-established techniques that we use, but really making sure that you're using the right ones for the right executive is important so that it sinks in and is well received.
I bet that is terrifying for a lot of executives you work with. The whole concept of needing to go out and pitch and do it in a different way.
Media training and presentation training, it's very similar, but there are some techniques for both in terms of how they're different and the audiences that you're speaking to. That's the other big piece is if you're giving a presentation in front of JP Morgan, that is very different from talking to a reporter at Stat or Wall Street Journal or a consumer media outlet. So we also work to help folks adapt their communication to the audience that they're speaking to. And that can be really important when you have scientist founders. You mentioned, someone from MIT. They need to be able to think about their audience and present the same information in a very different way. So, practicing per audience is something else that we do as well. Even down to the individual, who are the investors in the room? Who are the reporters in the room? We know them. We know what they're like. We know the types of questions and can really help people prepare down to that individual meeting level, even if someone's worried, oh, geez, I have to go present to Wedbush or whatever it may be. Getting to know that person that they're presenting to and then being specific about that training. Not to mention FDA training too. I mean, a lot of our companies are going to the FDA. How do you prepare for an ad panel, an ad board, for example? Who are the players in the room? What are they like? What are the questions they ask? And how do you prepare for that? Just, again, really understanding the audience is important as well.
I had no idea that people prepared for FDA meetings like that.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Especially for something like an ad board. I do not work with in the Alzheimer's space, so I have no skin in the specific game. But just yesterday, it was announced that a company has an ad board. I think the date is June 10th for one of their Alzheimer's drugs. I guarantee you, there is a ton of prep work and mock panels and mock trainings that are happening now every day until June 10th. You want to go in there and be ready. This is an important moment. How you communicate your message. There's nothing more important.
I would love to talk a little bit about the future trends that you're seeing. Is there anything that people should be aware of coming down the pike? I feel everyone talks about TikTok and all of these things, but what realistically for this crowd is cool and new in this space?
I think about it in a couple of different categories. For communications, of course, the trend will continue to be towards integrated communications. Media relations continues to be very important, but it's a very crowded space. Journalists are losing their jobs. The journalists that are left have multiple things to do. And so companies really need to be prepared to tell their own stories. And I think we'll continue to see needs for content strategy and channel strategy as to how you tell your story across a lot of different channels. And that includes not just digital media, but paid and working media as well. And we've been thinking about that for a long time. At Health+Commerce, we started as really a traditional public relations agency, but over the years have really built our team and grown our capabilities to provide more integrated services, knowing that clients need that and that things like your website or your social media presence will just continue to grow in importance and value. And how can we think about a communication strategy that encompasses all of those things? So I think that will continue to be something to watch. Of course, there's AI. I'm not an expert in AI yet, but it's something that we're watching. I do know a lot of agencies are thinking about how to incorporate it into their business, if it's even for things like first drafts of materials or being able to pull certain research in preparation for meetings. So that's something we're watching. It's also a reason we recently joined Supreme Group, which acquired Health+Commerce recently, but they have a lot of expertise in digital marketing and an interest in AI and how it will be used in communications. And we know that is coming. and partnering with them to understand that a little bit better to help shore up our agency for the future. In biotech, I have tons of predictions and trends and things that are happening. I won't bore you with them all. I do think what's happening with the GLP-1s, the obesity drug, is just absolutely fascinating. And I'll wake up one day and think, oh my gosh, I don't want to hear about this ever again. Everybody's talking about it. But I really think we're just scratching the surface, actually. And a great example is I've been reading these articles about how women who are on these GLP-1 drugs are now getting pregnant. And it's because they have PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And PCOS, it's a leading cause of infertility, but it also is an endocrine disorder and it causes weight gain and all these other issues. So it's actually helping women with these other conditions, get pregnant or whatever it may be. We know we're starting to understand the benefits in cardiovascular health and things like that. And the more people that are on these medicines, the more we're going to just learn about how they work and their impact on health and weight on health. And I just think that's absolutely fascinating. And as you're working with a communications expert, we need to be on top of those trends and understand how that may impact our companies, our clients. We have a client developing something for PCOS, staying on top of it, reading the news, understanding those trends and how it may impact their business, how they need to be prepared to answer questions about it when they're sitting in front of investors. So just staying on top of trends in the biotech industry is critical to helping our clients think about the impact of them on their business, even if it's not a clear straight line.
So related to that, if you see something happening that's negative, how, let's say, a side effect of these GLP-1s that's not a positive thing and that could impact your clients, how do you scramble the troops to start to get ahead of that and to start to combat any sort of press that's negative?
This is where I would go back to the importance of having communications play a strategic cross-functional role within your organization. Because if you're learning about that, like if you have a clinical study or you're learning about, a side effect of one of your drugs, you don't want the last person to know to be your communications person. You want them to be at the table when you're thinking about what is the impact of this, who do we need to communicate to, how, and what do we want to say. And I have a real life example of this where we have a client that had their trial was going very well. They had a safety issue and they went through all the steps of what they needed to do to be compliant, to report it to the FDA, report it to clinical trial investigators, report it to patients in the study, et cetera. But one thing that they hadn't really thought of is that the disease area that they're in was a very, very active, tight-knit patient group that uses social media a lot. So, posting videos of their children, even though they're in a blinded study, you're posting a video of your child doing something that they couldn't do before. That word gets out about those certain types of things. So we were like, did you think about if a patient or family member in the study posts something on social media? So the company was only thinking about controlling the narrative in terms of who they needed to tell, but we were thinking about who's going to try to tell that story for you through whatever, like a harmless video of their vacation on TikTok, but it shows that child doing that thing. So, just being part of that discussion and being prepared for it. We also just work very closely to understand the situation, scenario plan, provide messages, think about where we would need or want to be proactive versus reactive and making sure we're compliant. So all of those things are expectations of your communications person when you're dealing with a crisis or negative information. But we deal with negative data frequently. Companies, we had a client this year that had 3 phase 3 studies in a row not meet their primary endpoint. And it was disastrous for the company. That's science. That's biotech. They didn't do anything wrong. It's just how science works, why biotech is risky. But we were prepared because early on, when we knew we would be communicating about those data, we had scenario plans. What will we do if it's positive? What will we do if it's negative? What will we do if it's mixed and murky? So when the data came in and everyone's, oh no, this isn't what we wanted, that's not the time to be thinking about your communication strategy. We had prepared for that, and we were able to activate and execute right away on the scenario that they had. So it's a lot of scenario planning, but you need to be at the table early and often.
That's really powerful. Thanks for sharing those stories. I think that will, obviously, biotech is risky, but it is nice to know that there are mechanisms that can be put in place to help manage that. So we interview really smart people on this podcast, and so I get to build my reading list at the same time.
Okay.
Can you share your favorite book? What should I add to my list?
All right. So this is a little random and something that nobody I know has ever heard of, but my favorite book is called The Instance of a Finger Post, Ian Pearce. I think I got it for 25 cents in a thrift store or something. And it's about a murder that happens in England in the 1600s. But the reason I love it is it's told from the perspective of 4 different people. And a lot of books today that are told from different perspectives, chapter to chapter, this one is 4 different sections. And you read the first section, you're like, totally know what happens. Then you read the second section, you're like, oh, wait a minute. And then you read the third one, you're like, hold on, it's seen at the same murder. And by the fourth, it all comes together. It just reminds me that there's so many different perspectives on even a murder. Like there's just so many different perspectives and ways that people look at things based on their life experience and what's going on with them. And it challenges me to just have an open mind, look for different perspectives. And also it's just a fun, good read. But it always reminds me just how different everybody comes at different problems, and that you need to take a lot of different perspectives into consideration.
Thank you so much. I will definitely read that. That sounds right up my alley. I love a good mystery book. I love a good mystery. Yeah. So on the list, thank you. Where can our audience get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
You can visit Health+Commerce website, and you can reach me on LinkedIn, Krysta Pellegrino on LinkedIn. Be happy to connect with your listeners.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'll put both of those in the show notes so that people can click through. This was really fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Nice to talk with you.